In this video, we're going to discuss the difference between equity and efficiency in economics. So when we say that an allocation of goods in an economy is efficient, what we really are talking about is Pareto efficiency. And that means that we're at a point where no one could be made better off. We can't make any person better off without making at least one person worse off. So if we're in some kind of allocation where there's no way that we could change the way the goods are divided to make someone better without at least hurting one other person, then we say that we are at a Pareto efficient allocation. However, a Pareto allocation might not be an equitable allocation. And by what we mean with equitable is we're really talking about fairness. Is it fair? If it's equitable, is it fair? Is the way that the goods are distributed in society fair to all the people in society? So let me give you an example. Let's say that we have let's talk about the market for cars, right? So let's say in our society that we live in a small community and there are 100 cars produced, and we have this community consists of Jay Leno and everybody else. So everybody else is all of us, and then there's Jay Leno. So this is the different ways. This is a set of Pareto efficient allocations all lie along that curve. But let's say that we happen to be here. This is the point where we're at, where Jay Leno gets 100 of the 100 cars that are produced, and everyone else gets 0. So at this point, because it lies along the PPF, we can think of this curve as the production possibilities frontier. This is the set of all the possible efficient in production allocations. Because we're here, this is Pareto optimal, or this is optimal in terms of production, right? And what we mean by that is that we couldn't give everyone else a car without hurting Jay Leno, right? So Jay Leno we can't have any situation where Jay Leno still gets 100 cars and then we get 2 cars or 3 cars or anything for everyone else. At this point, the best that can happen without screwing over Jay Leno is that everyone else gets 0 cars. So although that's efficient, we would say that that's not equitable, right? So that's efficient, but it's not equitable. It's not fair. And the reason is people would say, hey, wait a minute, why does Jay Leno need 100 cars? I know he has a big garage, but still, why does he need all 100 cars? What about everybody else? And so you might say, hey, let's get the government here to come in and force Jay Leno to transfer some of his resources. We'd really like to be at a point here. So let's say this initial point is point X, and we'd really like to get to point Z over here. And we say, hey, look, that would be efficient in production too. But as part of the transfer, let's just say we end up somewhere inside the PPF at point X. So at point X, this is inefficient. This is inefficient in production. And why? The reason is that we're wasting some resources in the sense that, let's just say, for example, that we attempted to transfer, we tried to transfer 6 cars. We had the government say, hey, look, we'll give Jay Leno 94 and everyone else is going to get 6. But then maybe throughout that process, everyone else ends up getting, let's say 4 cars or 5 cars. And you say, hey, well, I thought we just had the government transfer 6. Well, this is a problem. It's sometimes referred to as the leaky bucket. It's an issue with government transfers. And the reason is that when you do this transfer, you change people's incentives. You're changing people's incentives, right? So if we think about this in terms of income, for example, and the amount of hours people are working, and think about it in terms of income instead of cars, when you transfer some income from someone who's wealthy to someone who's not as wealthy, you've given the person who's wealthy less of an incentive to work. I'm not saying they're not going to continue working or something like that, but you've changed their incentives. As you transfer resources from somebody, you change their incentives, right? So that's why we say the taxes are distortionary unless they're a lump sum tax. Most taxes are distortionary in that they change people's incentives. The people who are having their income transferred away or the cars transferred away have now a disincentive. They don't have as strong an incentive to work and earn money. And then the people who are receiving the transfer have less of an incentive to work. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't have any transfers, right? It's not saying just because of this incentive problem that we're not going to have any transfers and we're just going to let Jay Leno have all 100 cars, right? So this really gets into the heart of public sector microeconomics, is this idea of there's an equity efficiency trade-off. The equity efficiency trade-off. And what we're saying here is we say, okay, look, it's not fair for Jay Leno to have all 100 cars. We know that. We know that. But how many cars are we supposed to transfer? What will the loss be? How will it change people's incentives? What's the best way to achieve this, right? Do we want to try and transfer 50 cars? If so, what is going to happen? How much equity do we need, right? Do we want where everybody has the exact same number of cars? Some people say that's too extreme. Now we're getting into communism or socialism. So this is a trade-off that you should be aware of. Now, there are a couple ways that you can think about it. So some people will say, look, what we need to do instead is instead of thinking about this transfer business, what we need to think about is how can we grow the pie? So if we think about it as a pie, right, with different slices of pie or a pizza, right? And you've got different slices. One way of thinking about it is, hey, is there some way I can make this pie even larger, right? So here with our PPF, we're just assuming that the technology is fixed and so forth. But that's just in the short run. In the long run, technology is not fixed, right? We can come up with new technology and stuff like that. So if we make the pie larger, then we might have a situation where Jay Leno is able to have 150 cars and everyone else gets 50. Wouldn't that be great, right? That's kind of a win-win situation where it's still kind of inequitable in that why does Jay Leno have or need so many cars? But we've helped both groups, right, in the long run. So some people say, look, we need to grow the pie. If we can grow the pie, then everybody is better off. And other people would say, look, that's nice in theory, but we might have difficulties growing the pie, or maybe we need to think, right now there are people who are struggling, and so we need to reallocate or redivide or figure out a different way so that we don't have, let's say, all of this part of the pie is going to Jay Leno, and then we have this part is the small part is for everybody else. So we might say, well, we need to reallocate it. We need to change the way. We need to do some transfers so that we get to here. But again, once you do that, you change people's incentives, and you get to where you might be at an inefficient allocation, right? And so that's the crux of this equity and inefficiency trade-off.